In the waters of the Caribbean and the Pacific, a new and controversial chapter in the war on drugs is unfolding. Since late August 2025, the United States military has been conducting lethal strikes against boats it claims are trafficking narcotics. With at least 37 people killed, this campaign raises a critical question. How does the United States decide which boats to target? Here's what we know. The official justification from the Trump administration is that these strikes are a necessary measure to stop the flow of illegal drugs into the United States. President Donald Trump has pointed to the high number of American deaths from drug overdoses as the legal basis for the action, defining the issue as a national security problem. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has framed this as a non-international armed conflict against drug cartels, comparing it to the war against al-Qaeda. The administration labels the individuals on the targeted boats as narco-terrorists and claims the vessels are operated by designated terrorist organizations, or DTOs. So what is the official process for selecting a target? According to the administration, it is driven by intelligence. Secretary Hegseth has stated that targeted vessels are known by our intelligence to be involved in illicit narcotics smuggling. The strikes have been concentrated on what are described as known narco-trafficking transit routes. The United States also claims the boats are operated by specific groups it has designated as terrorist organizations. Among those named are the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua and the Colombian guerrilla group, the National Liberation Army, also known as the ELN. The campaign began in the Caribbean, reportedly targeting vessels from Venezuela. But in October 2025, it expanded to the eastern Pacific Ocean. This is a significant development, as the Pacific is a primary corridor for cocaine headed to the United States, while the Caribbean is often a route for drugs destined for Europe. This escalation is part of a larger military deployment that began in August 2025, involving warships, thousands of troops, and advanced aircraft like F-35 fighter jets. President Trump has also suggested the campaign could eventually expand to land-based targets without seeking a formal declaration of war from Congress.
But while the official story is one of precise intelligence-led strikes, the reality on the water is far murkier, and the human consequences are stark. In September, shortly after the first United States strike, dismembered bodies began washing ashore on the beaches of Trinidad and Tobago. Locals and officials suspect they are the remains of people killed in the United States attacks. The bodies showed signs of being mangled by an explosion. Family members have identified at least 2 Trinidadian nationals among the dead and strongly dispute that they were involved in drug trafficking. Then there is the case of Andres Fernando Tufino Chila, an Ecuadorian man who survived a United States strike on a semi-submersible vessel in the Caribbean. These low-profile boats are notoriously difficult to detect by radar or visually, as most of the vessel sits below the waterline. After his rescue, Tufino Chila was sent back to Ecuador, where authorities released him, stating there was no evidence he had committed a crime. His family says he is simply a fisherman. However, records show he does have a prior United States conviction for drug smuggling from 2020. A Colombian man who survived the same strike was hospitalized with severe injuries. These cases highlight a central criticism of the campaign. The administration has not released any public evidence to prove that the boats it destroyed were carrying drugs or that the people it killed were cartel members. This lack of transparency has fueled a legal and ethical firestorm. Numerous international law experts and human rights groups have questioned the legality of the strikes. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Counterterrorism and Human Rights, Ben Saul, condemned the operations as illegal killings under international law, stating there is no legal authority to use military force to kill suspected drug traffickers on the high seas. 3 United Nations experts went further, calling the bombings a potential extrajudicial execution and a breach of the United Nations Charter. The United States government's counterargument rests on redefining the situation. By declaring it is in an armed conflict with the cartels, the administration shifts the legal framework from one of law enforcement to the laws of war.
For decades, the approach to drug trafficking at sea was led by the United States Coast Guard, which would interdict or intercept suspicious vessels and detain the crew for prosecution in the justice system. This new strategy replaces arrest and trial with lethal force. The scale of the military deployment has also led some experts to question the true objective. They ask whether the primary goal is really about stopping narcotics or if it's a way to apply pressure on the Venezuelan government of Nicolás Maduro. This leaves us with critical, unanswered questions. The precise intelligence and the specific criteria used to authorize each strike remain classified. Without independent verification, it is impossible to know if every boat targeted was indeed involved in drug trafficking, or if every person killed was a narco-terrorist. The official position is that the United States knows exactly who it is targeting. But as long as the evidence behind those decisions remain secret, the questions about the legality, morality, and ultimate goal of this deadly campaign will continue to grow.